Our government sucks.
It's being called the biggest spy machine ever.
You know it's just going to get bigger. They're just going to use these resources in new ways.
To be specific, they show the FBI taught its agents that they could sometimes, quote, bend or suspend the law in their hunt for terrorists and criminals.
It outlaws certain forms of peaceful protest if you happen to be within close proximity to high-ranking elected officials who are receiving Secret Service protection. That can be considered a felony. So if you can't protest in your own nation's capital, what kind of constitutional republic have we become? When you don't have the right to protest, you don't have much left.
If the government calls you a terrorist, they can kill you, and the rest of us are just supposed to take their word for it.
The U.S. government now laying out its legal argument for killing American citizens overseas without a trial. But what about targeting people on U.S. soil?
Does that only apply to U.S. citizen that's overseas, or does that apply to a U.S. citizen that's here?
I'd have to go back. I'm not certain whether that was addressed or not.
So that we have clarity here, he is not certain whether it was addressed, whether our government can kill our own people inside our own country.
Are you slightly uncomfortable with the idea that the United States president, whoever it may be, can decide that this or that U.S. citizen living abroad is a threat to national security and kill them? And you think that the president should be able to make that decision in conjunction with the folks in the administration without going to a court, without going to you all, anything?
There is a war going on. There's no question about that. He's the commander-in-chief, and there's been guidelines set, and if he follows those, I think he should be able to do it.
Just so I understand correctly, are you really saying that in certain situations the president can decide whether it's in the best interests of the nation and then do something illegal?
I'm saying that when the president does it, that means it's not illegal.
This federal government, this administration says it can kill Americans when they're riding with their children in a car in a desert.
That is quite a horrifying reality of how our government functions these days, of how completely out of hand this war on terror has become.
So we can kill you anywhere, and we don't have to ask a damn soul about it. So Eric Holder said, okay, you know what, we've been getting a lot of flack for that. I'm going to go to Northwestern, I'm going to clear this thing up. And he did. He gave a speech where he explained that there are no rules.
Some have argued that the president is required to get permission from a federal court before taking action against a United States citizen. This is simply not accurate. Due process and judicial process are not one and the same, particularly when it comes to national security. The Constitution guarantees due process. It does not guarantee judicial process.
And now a new interpretation of the Constitution where due process is a bunch of guys in the executive branch getting together saying, should we kill somebody? Yeah, let's go ahead and kill him.
But the thing that makes it critical here is that the U.S. government unilaterally, without any proof, without any due process at all, is actually pointing the finger and saying, you, my friend, are a terrorist. So the question then becomes, if they get to decide, what makes you question whether or not they can't decide that it's you, or it's me, or it's my neighbor, or my father, or my son?
The Constitution says to the contrary. The Constitution says if the government wants your life, or your liberty, or your property, it has to articulate to a jury what law you have violated and prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt to that jury. It's called due process. Without due process, the government could take anything it wanted and kill anybody it wanted.
Well, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, along with the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Office, have placed a large and rather interesting order. They've ordered 450 million rounds of ammunition to be made and delivered to them over the next 5 years. All right, so this is interesting because this is not the Pentagon making the order for the military. It's DHS and ICE. And to give you a little perspective here, there are only about 311 million people living in the entire country. So it begs the question, why such a massive order, 450 million bullets?
DHS, Department of Homeland Security, consists of the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, and Immigration Services. This is a domestic law enforcement agency. And to be fair, some people online who don't want to believe what's going on have said that this is just going to be used for target practice, or also it could be that the government is simply stockpiling ammunition because they don't want to get into a situation where there's an ammo shortage and our law enforcement officers don't have any ammunition. And those are both fair points, but that kind of ammo that they purchase from ATK, hollow point ammunition, as you had explained, it's designed to, tear through human flesh and then expand. It's designed to kill people. This is not the optimal kind of ammo you would buy for target practice. It's more expensive and it's more precise. But even if they're burning through 20 million rounds a month to train their agents, this is still overkill. This is still too much. So best is, as you said, they're planning for economic unrest or violent protests or something that requires hollow point ammunition on a wide scale. And they have an open bid right now, DHS, for even more ammunition for 175 million rounds of .223 caliber rifle ammo. We're rapidly militarizing our domestic law enforcement officers, and I think a lot of people are scared. TSA is scary enough. Wait until they all have guns.
Well, I mean,
you can't speak back when they're groping you at the airport.
Since 2001, the federal government has spent $34 billion on militarizing our local police enforcement.
However, several police stations across the country have splurged on some pretty fancy equipment. The Bearcat 3. This is a 9-ton armored vehicle with bullet-resistant windows, gun ports, tear gas dispenser, loudspeaker, and a battering ram on the front bumper. Several departments, including the NYPD, are also using mobile watchtowers, giving cops an eye in the sky. Well, they took it one step further and used a DHS grant to get their own weaponized drone. That's right, this $300,000 Shadowhawk drone made by Vanguard Defense Industries weighs 50 pounds and can be equipped with a beanbag launcher and a taser, giving officers the ability to stop a target from the sky. Does the name Shadowhawk sound familiar? That's because they're the same brand that's used by the military in Afghanistan for counterterrorism operations. So why do cops need a tank or a drone? Well, they don't. But if they can get one, then they figure why not. Call me crazy, but these devices need to be left to the military for war situations, not to use against Americans for domestic purposes. And of course, if you throw the words national security or terrorism in there, everyone acts like it's no big deal.
Even though these police departments don't need this equipment, they will still use it, and they'll use it for stupid things. Like, for instance, they'll go to they'll raid a party, for instance, right? No, but this is happening throughout the country, right? And this is a police state. Our police enforcement is militarized, so they'll overreact to stupid situations.
And to give all of these agents so much firepower, it really does make you wonder if they know something that the American people do not know about.
They're talking about inserting the Army into domestic law enforcement. Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports this bill, says, quote, "The homeland is part of the battlefield, and people can be held without trial, whether an American citizen or not."
The government may be preparing for some sort of martial law.
We shine the spotlight on an executive order that the White House was hoping that you would never learn about. Now, the president signed the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order.
It gives the president the power to control U.S. resources in times of war and peace.
Now, this includes, but is not limited to, food and livestock, water, plants, energy, health resources, transportation, and construction materials, and gives the government the ability to, quote, control the general distribution of any material, including applicable services, in the civilian market. This would give the President of the United States the authority to declare, basically, martial law during times of peace.
So it's starting to sound more and more like we're getting closer to martial law by the day. Now, while you say that most Americans say that they don't care, they have nothing to hide, I think those Americans would care, might feel differently if it turns out that what the police were doing is illegal. They're law enforcement, and yet many departments aren't even bothering to get warrants because they can get the technology on their own. And, going through the court system, getting a warrant, all that stuff is just so tedious. If you're not breaking the law, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you shouldn't worry what the government is doing.
Well, I think the average person out there thinks that this is only being used to pursue radical Islam and these terrorist groups, but they don't need a law like this to go after 150 or 200 people. This is being used on tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Americans, where they just go on these fishing expeditions looking for stuff. And, your viewers out there can say, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't have anything to worry about. But we've always been told from a young age in school onward that if you're not doing anything wrong, the government in America does not look through your emails. The government does not look through what you're doing.
If it's the bad guys, it's those foreign terrorists, then it's okay. It's not like my government would ever do it to me. But guess what? You're wrong, because your government would totally do that to you, and now they'll be able to by law.
Some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house.
That's right. People who pay for small purchases in cash, like coffee or gum, apparently that's a big red flag. Big time.
So you should be careful of those that are overly concerned about their privacy. And that is the exact language in the FBI pamphlet. And attempting to shield your computer screen from other patrons, well, that's a sure sign that you're suspicious.
We're talking about someone suspected of activities.
All right, so despite the fact that there's no relation to any terrorist activity or investigation, the government has decided that they want to keep all that data that they have about you anyway, because you never know when you're going to need it somewhere down the line. But as much as we all want the country to be safe, want the authorities to be on top of it, are we really willing to have the government consider each and every one of us a terrorist? Because you see, that's essentially what's happening. If you look at the language within the guidelines of the NCTC and what it's meant for, it's supposed to receive intelligence exclusively pertaining to domestic terrorism.
Counterterrorism officials are now allowed to keep tabs on anyone for up to 5 years, even if they have no ties to terror.
And if you somehow think habeas corpus has not been suspended for American citizens, but only for everybody else, ask yourself this. If you are pulled off the street tomorrow and they call you an alien or an undocumented immigrant or an unlawful enemy combatant, exactly how are you going to convince them to give you a court hearing to prove you are not? Do you think this Attorney General is going to help you?
And I think that if the average person knew about this, they would be quite upset. I think the average person just doesn't know, to be honest. I hope that they do find out about these grotesque abuses of government power and just massive wastes of money. And, you know, we're more than a decade out from 9/11. We've killed Osama bin Laden. We have killed or detained most of his deputies. So the real question becomes, who are we fighting against? This should be a dinner table conversation. Every American should be asking, should we be spending billions of dollars on these things when people are out of work, when our infrastructure is failing, and when other economies like China are, you know, steaming ahead and we're falling behind? Is this really what we should be spending our money on, spying on our own people and buying ammunition to protect the government against our own people? It doesn't make sense. I think the Patriot Act should have been allowed to expire, and it's a huge mistake that Obama renewed it.
That America that you once knew.
Our government sucks.
So we need to wake up and speak out about these practices before every shred of our privacy is gone.
America, the greatest losses to our freedom have come not from someone attacking us, but from the government ignoring the Constitution and the majority letting them get away with it.
Yeah, we torture. Yeah, we spy on you. Yeah, we do all of this, but it's no big deal. Get used to it. You know what? We're not going to get used to it.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there is liberty.
In conjunction with the folks in the administration, without going to a court, without going to you all, anything.
There is a war going on. There's no question about that. He's the commander-in-chief, and there have been guidelines set, and if he follows those, I think he should be able to do it.
Just so I understand correctly, are you really saying that in certain situations, the president can...
He is not certain whether it was addressed, whether our government can kill our own people inside our own country.
Are you slightly uncomfortable with the idea that the United States president, whoever it may be, can decide that this or that U.S. citizen living abroad is a threat to national security and kill them? And you think that the president should be able to make that decision?
Our government sucks.
It's being called the biggest spy machine ever.
You know it's just going to get bigger. They're just going to use these resources in new ways.
To be specific, they show that the FBI taught its agents that they could sometimes, quote, bend or suspend the law in their hunt for terrorists and criminals.
It outlaws certain forms of peaceful protest. If you happen to be within
its legal argument for killing American citizens overseas without a trial. But what about targeting people on U.S. soil?
Does that only apply to U.S. citizen that's overseas, or does that apply to U.S. citizen that's here?
I'd have to go back. I'm not certain whether that was addressed or not.
So that we have clarity here.
Close proximity to high-ranking elected officials who are receiving Secret Service protection, that can be considered a felony. So if you can't protest in your own nation's capital, what kind of constitutional republic have we become? When you don't have the right to protest, you don't have much left.
If the government calls you a terrorist, they can kill you, and the rest of us are just supposed to take their word for it.
The U.S. government now laying